Well, good afternoon, everybody. It looks like the back rows are filling up, so that means it's time to start. I'm John Applegate, and it's my pleasure to introduce this conversation. As you can see, it's set up to be very conversational, complete with the comfy chairs and everything. But my job really is just to introduce our two conversationalists, conversers. Anyway, to my far left is Joe Tomain. Joe is the Dean Emeritus and Wilbert and Helen Ziegler Professor of Law at the University of Cincinnati College of Law, and I can say in complete honesty that I cannot think of anyone I would rather introduce than Joe. I have known him for nearly 40 years, and he has been, during that time, a colleague, my boss, a mentor, a casebook author, and above all, a friend. His main focus academically has been regulation, which is the law and policy of how government regulates, as opposed to administrative law per se, though he knows a little about that too. And he teaches, as a result, energy law, land use, regulatory policy, and for some reason, contracts. Joe's written extensively in the energy law field. That's where I think of him mostly, including his defining description of the dominant model of energy regulation, which some of you poor souls have been made to read in my class. Just to give you an idea of some book titles, which will, I think, explain better what he does: regulatory law and policy, energy law and policy, clean energy, clean power, energy politics, energy law in the U.S., ending dirty energy policy, and nuclear power transformation. I would say that the central theme of his work is the idea that while large concentrations of privately owned capital have been essential to our country's growth and prosperity over many, many years, they must be counterbalanced by a robust and thoughtful system of government regulation to assure that the public interest is protected. And the theme of today's discussion and his book, which he's conveniently holding, How Government Built America, takes this one step further and says, well, those concentrations of privately owned capital did not come from nowhere, and that government not only regulated them, but helped to create them in the first place. Joe served as the Dean of the University of Cincinnati College of Law for 15 years. That's where he was my boss. And he is active in many, many local, national, and state organizations, bar organizations, and so on. Most voracious reader I know, and when I last saw him a few weeks ago in Cincinnati, he complained bitterly about the number of books that he could fit on his bookshelves in his new office.
Too few.
Exactly. Nick Almendares needs less of an introduction because I think we all know him. Nick joined the Maurer School faculty in 2020 from the University of Virginia School of Law, where he was program director of the Karsh Center for Law and Democracy. He's taught at the Seton Hall University School of Law and Tulane University Law School, and clerked for the Honorable Janice Graham in the Southern District of Texas. His research focuses primarily on accountability and democracy issues across areas of law, such as class actions, separation of powers, collective responsibility, and campaign financing. His work takes an interdisciplinary approach, as those of us who have read his work or talked with him or taken classes from him know, and he draws on economics, social science, and philosophy, which makes him the perfect person to discuss this book with Joe Tomain. With that, I will stop taking up your time, and Nick, do I hand it over to you to ask the first question?
I guess so.
Okay.
Cast the first stone. Yeah, well, so most of us in the room have not had a chance to read the book, right? So let's start off with maybe a quick summary of the broad thesis of the book, which I read as a kind of intellectual history with maybe a socio-political bent, but that's how I read it.
Yeah, so I'll give you a little bit of a background to this book, which is that in 2014, my co-author Sid Shapiro and I published a book called Achieving Democracy, The Future of Progressive Reform. 2014 was the next to the last year of the Obama administration, and we thought in writing that book that the country had taken a turn away from neoliberalism of the 80s, 90s, and early aughts, and was shifting back towards a view of government as friendly and a partner rather than antagonistic. That's what we thought in 2014.
Prescient.
Then 2016 comes along, and the vocabulary changes. I want to add one other thing. The reason we thought that the government had changed is, and I can do this, I won't now, but I could take you back to the founding, and every generation, there are alternating periods in which the government is seen as friendly, and then as antagonistic, and then as friendly and as antagonistic. And we thought we were moving from an antagonistic phrase to a friendly phrase, and then 2016 occurs. And so we had to question what we were doing. That's the prelude to this book, which the themes are, the simplest theme is that government and markets have always worked together. John had mentioned that point, Nick alluded to it as well. We then say, here's our three points. Number one, and that is government is necessary to create, sustain, and monitor markets, number one. Number two, government is also necessary to correct market imperfections and failures, okay? And the third one is that there are those persons who are disadvantaged by being out of a market economy, and that government provides a safety net for those persons who are economically and even politically disenfranchised. So those are the 3 points. Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, and I want to push you, I think, on the first point,
yes,
right? Which comes across as kind of and it's a little subtle in the book even, but it's sort of, I think it's like the broad side, which is, so, and maybe, I mean, we're in a law school, and maybe I just come kind of pre-convinced, right? But, I mean, does anyone actually believe that, say, government and markets, I guess that markets can exist without some sort of government, I guess, full stop, question mark?
I love the point, because the answer is, of course not.
Yeah, right.
Okay? In fact, when I teach government regulation, the first thing out of my mouth when I tell you to the students is I go, I want you to, after the end of the semester, I want you to understand one takeaway, and that's it. Without government, there are no markets, right? However, as you know, the polemics, the rhetoric around it is extraordinary, that government is bad, and markets are good. That's the whole neoliberal paradigm, it seems to me. And so we wrote this book for a general audience to sort of unpack this idea that there is a thing called government that exists separately from markets or the other way around, right? You could do it either way, and we'd have a different discourse about which one precedes the other. For me, it's governments precede markets. I mean, you can have an economy without a market, right? You can have a barter economy. I'll trade you my seashell for your rock because I think it's prettier than my seashell, but it's not going to be a very sophisticated economy.
No.
And it's not going to be a credit economy. And when I use the word market, Nick, tell me if I'm wrong on this, and that is, I'm thinking of a credit economy.
Yeah, or just currency, contracts, information. There's always assumptions baked into like a well-functioning market.
And the other thing, if I may, this idea that the people that wail against markets, how about somebody who wails against government efficiency that gets government contracts?
Well, I mean,
This
such
has
a fanciful
always been
character
going
cannot
on.
be imagined, but let's just try to let's work within the hypo, okay? But that kind of tees up where I'm kind of going with this, because like as you set up the kind of the motivation for the book, right? The almost the foil or the motivation was neoliberalism,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Which was definitely dominant during George W. Bush, and I think even into the Obama years, right? We might
Yes,
say,
absolutely.
like TARP and the bailouts and the Great
Yeah.
Recession, right? Kind of motivated by that. And now we're in 2025, gosh, I mean, have we kind of moved beyond that debate? I mean, is now it just not a question of markets versus government, but a question of divvying up spoils, right? Because of perhaps these imaginary characters who would rail about against government efficiency, yet also say, please, 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 let me feed at that trough. Right.
Yeah, so I guess I'm a little agnostic as to whether or not we've transcended that and moved to something else. In the sense of, I think it's always been about divvying up the spoils, right?
Yeah.
I mean, one definition, you're the doctor of political science, and so I'm intimidated by your questions. But one
Great, just go with that.
One definition of politics is who gets what, right? I mean, when you bring it right down to it. So it's always been there. For me, neoliberalism Sid and I more directly addressed it and critiqued it in the previous book. And in this book, we left out the words democracy and capitalism and put government and markets in as trying to broaden the reach of it. But I don't think that we've gone beyond it, except though, and Sid and I'll refer to him throughout our conversation, I'm sure, have a slight disagreement about where we are today. I think today is unique. I think we're in a period that we have never seen before. Sid's slightly different view is, well, things have been pretty bad if you look at the Great Depression, you look at the Civil War, and the country has worked through it. So he's maybe a little more hopeful than me or clear-eyed than I am. I have a difficult time foreseeing the future.
Yeah, well, I mean, worked through it, at the cost of over 500,000 dead,
Wow.
and things like that. So, but with that as like kind of a pivot, so why might you think today is, and Sid's not here, so we don't he got his say, right? The book's hundreds of pages long, but why might you say today is more of a fundamental break than, say, the Andrew Jackson administration or than the Ronald Reagan administration?
Yeah. Well, Reagan's a little easier, I think, because for all his rhetoric, I mean, he raised taxes, he didn't get rid of regulation, he spoke the deregulatory game. Remember, he was going to get rid of the Department of Energy, he was going to get rid of the Department of Education.
We just hate all the ones that begin with E.
Yeah, there
Begins with
you
E,
go.
it's on the chopping block.
Do all the E's. And so he did none of that, right? And so the conservatives will look to him as this father of certain conservatism, but my goodness, he really wasn't that radical, all right? Andrew Jackson, because he lived in a different time, I think his legacy of patronage we see today, but I don't think there's much more than that. So I hope I was a little bit responsive.
Yeah. So then what might you identify, as like a key difference? Like, is, say, the current Trump administration, right, Trump 2, more radical then?
Yeah,
They're talking the talk and walking the walk?
So you know what? We're 2 months in, 8 weeks in, or 8 or 9 weeks in. So it's hard to make grand pronouncements. But you know, thinking about what is the theme of this book? Well, I gave you our 3 targets, but I think the big theme is that when the mix between government and markets is in a healthy balance, when that's true, that it somehow, at least this is our, most of the book's descriptive rather than prescriptive, but our prescriptive part is that when the government is in balance, that the democratic values of liberty, equality, fairness, and the common good are furthered, okay? Now, here's my bias. I would argue that the New Deal Great Society era was a period in which freedom expanded, that liberty expanded, that equality expanded during that period of time. And I think the common good expanded. We enjoyed great wealth, etc. A period of neoliberalism I'm more critical of. Why? It actually added inequality, particularly in terms of wealth and income during that period. And so if the test of a healthy mix of government and markets is the advancement of democratic values, I think one could say that there are periods where the mix did that and there are periods when it didn't. Now, I have to add, and this is one of my sort of, I was favorite, I can't think of a better word at this point, but favorite parts of the book is when we're talking about a healthy mix or an unhealthy mix, it's not partisan. There's a bipartisan dimension to this book that we did not intend when we started, but I think came out. My favorite part of writing the book, in some sense, was, oh my goodness, I never realized Eisenhower was a New Dealer, right?
Or that Carter was so deregulatory, which was...
He was deregulatory, Clinton was deregulatory, Obama was a neoliberal.
Like the ancient past to many people in the room here.
But when you go through these periods, you go, oh my goodness, the stuff that we're trying to describe is not a tract for progressives or liberals or Democrats. It's trying to explain how the system works, right? And again, as the title, How Government Built America, indicates, we have a bias. And our bias is that government is necessary. I mean, for me, one of the things that we don't talk about enough is that, here it is. Without government, you would not have this. All right? Government investment in basic research and science and technology is really responsible for a lot of the things that we enjoy every single day. Nick, I may throw a question at you. This may be rhetorical. I've always wondered, if government creates the algorithms that creates GPS, touchscreens, and any other number of things that we already have, why didn't government ever take a piece of that pie?
Oh, well.
Why did they pass it off completely? They come up with the invention, and government passes it off to the private sector. Why? Because they're better at marketing and managing these technologies than government is. I think that's fine. But why didn't we take a piece of it?
Yeah, right. Well, we'll talk about the images of politics in a second.
I raised the question as a rhetorical, a thought experiment, right? You know, if we're going to let, somebody create electric vehicles and subsidize them, why don't we get some Tesla stock? Whoops. Maybe not now.
We could diversify. We could be,
right.
conservatives. But let's sticking on the role of government here. So I think, especially in the course of this conversation, I see 2 roles of government posited by the book. Okay, one is, call it like a foundational role, right? Like money, contracts, right?
Yeah.
Information security, tort law, right? Like there's a reason the food we eat is reasonably safe, those sorts of things, right? It's like ground level 1, right?
Yeah.
And that's like a basic enabling role. But then the other one that I don't think has come out in our conversation yet, but is in the book, is as a restraint on markets, right?
Yes.
And in the book, right, and this speaks to a little bit of, like, I think, the bipartisan or the getting the right mix right. There are times you describe overregulation and underregulation,
Yes.
right? So I think maybe like the airlines
Yes.
would be an overregulation example, and then the banking underregulation and the Great Recession, maybe a more present example for most of us in the room, right, would be a good example of underregulation. And we sort of inevitably kind of bounce back and forth, making mistakes along the way, right?
Yes.
But you also comp to, and I'm going to stick with the Great Recession example, that being a failure of both government and markets.
Yes.
So one read of the stories you tell in the book, right, is as government as restraint on markets, on rapacious markets, that sometimes fails, right? But another, and the book, by the way, is sprinkled through, like, with various pop culture references, is that actually when things go off the rails, they're more like Thelma and Louise driving off the cliff, right? And so, government's not restraining, government's a partner, and the bad stuff, we should blame them both equally for, or something approaching equally for,
Yes.
both markets and government.
No, I think that's fair. I mean, one of the first things we say in the opening pages of the book is government's not perfect. It's not going to get it right. And the
But
more
a bold claim.
Yeah. Well, the trickier thing is, and I think it's the subject of all, the whole field of political economy is what's the relationship between the two. For me, I have a preference that politics ought to proceed and have some force over economics. But if you're an economic determinist, you're going to go exactly the other way. And you're not wrong, right? I mean, what is rent seeking other than the power of the economy to get government benefits? Can they go off the rails? Yes. Do they go off the rails? Yes. I want to slightly change focus in response to your comment and question a little bit. I want to go back to, when did government go wrong? What would be an example of government getting it incorrect? And I would go back to the Carter deregulatory movement. Mm-hmm. It seems to me that even though Reagan is known as the deregulation president, it really started dramatically with Carter. He deregulated transportation, oil, gas, electricity, savings and loans, communications. These were all Carter initiatives. From my perspective, when Carter started to deregulate those industries, he did it on the basis that we have expert testimony with evidence that these industries are overregulated and that we should deregulate, not complete deregulation, and re-regulation may be a better label for what Carter did, but that let's reduce the amount of price setting that's done in those industries, open them up to more competition, and maybe we'll have some benefits. The airline is a classic example, and we can debate, and there is debate in the scholarly and economic literature as to whether or not airline deregulation was a success or a failure, and you can read on both angles of it. But for me, the Carter deregulation was getting away from what people used to call command and control, or the heavy hand of regulation that came out in the 30s. It was time to do some regulatory reform. Carter did that. Now let's move into Reagan and Clinton's deregulation. I think they went too far. I think in large instance, Reagan deregulation was more of a political trope than it really was a plan. Then you get to Clinton, however, he deregulates banking, he deregulates communications. That didn't go well. That didn't go well. So it depends upon, how much politics overcomes economic theory. And I think for a lot of the neoliberalism, particularly as it manifests in the Carter administration, like I said, this isn't partisan. I think Carter's getting rid of Glass-Steagall was a complete disaster. I think some of his deregulation initiatives in telecommunications has not really been a good idea. I think we've seen a lot more concentration in the telecommunications industry than as a result of Telecommunications Act of '96. But
Yeah, and there's something here that's interesting when we think about deregulation, like broadly speaking. So you mentioned telecommunications, and I think I see some of my students here who have been inflicted various case law about this. But on the one hand, we see a broad swath of deregulation. So you can buy as many radio stations you want, you can buy as many media stations you want. There's no whatever, no watershed hour, no equal time. Right? On the other hand, we seem to also see a nascent or an emergent desire to regulate speech itself, right?
Oh boy!
And is this just a question of like picking and choosing, or is this just naked politics? You think, or are we way off the subject matter of the book because this is not in the book?
Yeah, no, it's not. And I defer to some other guy named Joe Tomain who teaches privacy law here at the law school.
Well, maybe we'll have a question and answer period. I'll just ask other people questions. But kind of speaking of democratic values, right? Because I think the book and most of the book, like you said, is descriptive, but towards the end of it, you get more prescriptive. The view of government in the book is explicitly evaluated, right? I think I have the quote here: how we achieve our national values.
Right.
And less explicit is what the point of a market is. And my sense is that it's not so explicitly evaluated, right? So maybe you can take a minute and tell us, one, if I'm wildly off base with your feelings about what the role of government is, or the point of government is, and two, what's the role of the market? What's
okay.
the role
I love markets, competitive markets.
Yeah.
And every time I hear the phrase, and I'm never going to get rid of it, but every now and then we'll have a speaker at the law school who's talk about the free market.
Drives me nuts.
There is no such thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to criticize classic market theory if there's competition. It's when the rules get bent, when you have rent seeking, as I mentioned earlier, and then that the rules get changed, then you got a problem. Then you have a real problem. You know what? Let's go back to Brandeis. Maybe bigness is badness. Let's rethink that. I think Lena Kahn's work, I don't know if you cover that in your classes, but I mean, this is sort of reviving the question of, wait a minute, there is something intrinsically corrupting about size. Okay, and I think we can see it. I like to tell my students when I teach government regulation about, all this technology, all this opportunities, your costs go down for your options on streaming and your internet service and all this other stuff. And I ask one question, I go, do you think your Netflix charges are going to go down? Do you really believe that? I mean, with size comes concentration. With concentration comes a reduction in choice. And one of the interesting things, I can only cite off the top of my head one paper, but with concentration also comes underinvestment in research and innovation. Boy, that's really that's corrupting.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about morally corrupting, but in terms of markets, it's corrupting the markets.
Yeah, and power corrupts.
Yeah.
Right, and then you have an instance of maybe where the government, the powerful agents go into the government, the powerful industries go into the government, and they use that to entrench. Well, we're in a law school, so I guess we should talk about the court for a little while. And I'm going to go on a limb. I'm going to call you critical of the current Roberts Court.
Well, there's an article I'm dying to read on the major questions doctrine.
It is quite a read. It's a page.
I will read it.
Yeah, it's only got like 300 footnotes, so it's like tame for a law review. Okay, so let's pivot to the major questions doctrine actually, because I tell my students to call something Lochner-esque in a law school setting is an epithet. It is almost the worst thing you can say. The only worst thing I think you can say is, I don't know, what do you think is the one worst case you can liken something to? There's two, I think. Go ahead, someone shout it out. Dred Scott. What's the other one? What's it? Plessy, yeah. And my other example would be Korematsu. But yeah, those are like that's it, right? So what we've said is if you say something's Lochner-esque, it's like just better than Plessy or Dred Scott and the Korematsu. Yeah, I see that face back there, like yeah, it's not a nice thing to say. You call the major questions doctrine Lochner-esque, right?
Yeah, no, I think so.
Yeah, join the dots for us. Tell us why it's the second worst thing we can imagine.
Well, I mean, look at, to me, the major question doctrine is bad from any number of number of perspectives, rather. And I don't know if you're familiar with Lisa Heinzerling's article called "The Power Canons." She guessed this a decade ago.
Yeah.
She's
I do not
talked about
prognosticate. So when people do it and do it well, I'm completely blown away.
But her argument was the Supreme Court is starting to take all this power into itself. Major questions doctrine, I think, is defective, and I'm anxious to read your article, Nick, because I'll learn some other reasons why. But I'll just start with one: is they made it up. I mean, there's nothing in preceding constitutional jurisprudence that requires a major questions doctrine. And from a purely pragmatic standpoint, you guys may know this example I'm going to give: Ohio versus the EPA, right? And the original decision, written by Gorsuch, I believe. Did he write Ohio, or is it Roberts?
No, I think it's Ohio. I think it's Gorsuch.
Gorsuch.
Yeah.
Well, he writes in his original opinion that EPA was wrong to regulate nitrous oxide, and later on that's laughing gas. What the what the EPA was actually regulating was nitrogen oxide, and when the newspapers came out with that, I'm going, well, his clerk got it wrong. Okay, no big deal. I don't know that that's true. I'm just hypothesizing that it's an honest mistake. That's thought number one. Thought number two is, who wouldn't make that mistake? Somebody who works for the EPA. And so this idea that courts can supervene policy-making decisions that I think have been entrusted to agencies is a fundamental flaw. And for me, this Ohio EPA, this, again, simple mistake, an honest mistake, but courts can't do it. They weren't created to do it, and I think that's, for me, Exhibit A of how they can't do it. So that's my quick take on major questions.
Yeah, so seizing policymaking authority by a branch that's
right,
or an institution that's ill-suited to doing it.
Right.
And I'm going to come back to the court for a minute. But let's stick on the EPA for a second. Yeah, right. Or the agencies in general. So the argument there is an argument from expertise, right? Your argument is like they are constructed, oriented in a way that courts are fundamentally not, right? So just to make it obvious, right? Like a court can't just call someone in, right? They can't be like, hey, can we get 10 scientists or 10 experts, 10 policy? Can we get like 15 economists in here and just chat with them? The EPA can, or Congress can, right? It's like we disable courts from doing this. It's inimical to their structure.
So here's the thing, though, Nick.
Sure.
On this issue, now we're developing this doctrine. It's almost out of Descartes, unless you get a clear and discrete definition of what the Congress wants. The courts may supervene it. I mean, that's where we're moving, right? The phrase is clear and distinct. Is that it?
It's not clear, but like a clear delegation.
Clear delegate. Okay. Yeah. Well, you know what? Go back to some of the original new doctrine legislation. You know what they delegated to agencies? Do it in the public interest. Yeah. That was the standard. Why have we gotten away with it? That's a rhetorical question. I mean, for the political.
That's a separate book,
Yeah, for the political power reasons that we've been alluding to. But no, wait a minute. This idea of having a clear and distinct or clear delegation, again, is made up. Where did that come from? Well, from my perspective, it came from 40 years of neoliberal thinking, and starting with Ed Meese and this golly, who's a guy didn't get in the Supreme Bork. These people sort of developed this idea, and then there was a really strong intellectual school that developed over these ideas, and a lot of these justices were educated in that school. There's a role that education has played in the shift in the way the current Supreme Court looks at the world, right? This is not new. They didn't come up with it on their own. They've been sort of nurtured along in that. And that's just the way intellectual fashions go. I happen to feel that it's a mistake, but, this is where we are. But I think, if I may, I'm sorry for yakking so much about this.
It's your book.
You brought the court up, and I think it's interesting. Another thing we found interesting in the book is, the court today is playing a role that is absorbing power to itself to make policy, which is affecting the mix between government and markets. Is this new? No. The court has always played a role in monitoring the mix of government and markets. Think about this. Go back to your Con Law 1 when you read Gibbons versus Ogden, McCullough versus Maryland, Dartmouth College, and Charles River Bridge cases. You know what they did? They just codified Alexander Hamilton's report on manufacturers and report on banking to create a strong political economy centered in the central government. That's what the court did in those cases in various ways. Now you move to Lochner and you go, no, the court's going to do whatever it chooses to do and protect capital against labor. That's my vision of Lochner in terms of the way it applied the contract clause. And then you sort of go into the New Deal. What did the New Deal do? Well, for the most part, it seems to me what the New Deal did is say, we're going to defer to Congress. We're going to defer to the legislature. We're going to defer to administrative agencies. That's what the New Deal settlement was all about. But it's the court that really created the atmosphere of how we're going to look at this mix between government and markets, and it's going to be deferral to legislative judgments. Okay, the court's always played a central role in defining the nature of our political economy. I love Bruce Ackerman's work on these constitutional moments because I think that he sort of makes that point.
Yeah, well, so if that's the case, right, is what distinguishes the current incarnation, say the Roberts Court, from a previous court that was active in that, from, say, a Warren Court that was unequivocally active, right? Or any of these much earlier courts where they were really kind of engaging in mixed economy. So like why, the Lochner Court was Lochner-esque. Okay, check. We got that. But what singles, that court and our current court out for criticism as opposed to the others? Are they just bad at it?
No, let's take people at their word. You have particularly Gorsuch, I think more than the others, Kavanaugh as well. They think the administrative state is too big, and they say it. Unless I get unless I get a clear direction, I'm not going to defer. The default is, oh, you're not going to defer. Here are two defaults. One is, okay, that's a signal for Congress to fix it. Are they going to do it? No. It's harder for the legislative process to work and rewrite legislation that whatever number of congresspersons will favor or disfavor. So the default to Congress, it doesn't work in a period of polarization. And so they go, okay, the second default, we'll decide ourselves. Well, the argument to say, well, we're not making policy, we're just saying what policy can't be made by the court by an agency rather, in itself is a policy decision. Doing nothing is always a policy decision. Yeah. Invalidating something is a policy decision. We may get a debate about that point, depending upon your political preferences. Nevertheless, I think the reality is not deciding is a decision.
And so what distinguishes, say, the current court is from previous courts is a lack of justification for what they're doing?
For me, it is an unwillingness, a clear unwillingness to defer too much to agencies and to defer too much to Congress. If Congress says clean the air, what's wrong with that? Go clean the air. Well, this court will say, well, how did you mean? What air? What water? No, but that's how the cases come out. again, go with Ohio EPA. Oh no, we didn't mean that group of states could control, or you had regulatory authority over.
Yeah, they set a very high bar for Congress and for the specificity of Congress, which, as you and others have pointed out, is like the thing Congress is worst at.
Yeah.
Right? Why have an agency? If Congress can just tell us we need 2 parts per million of benzene in the air, they can just do that directly. We don't need an agency to figure out. But Congress has better things to do than benzene. But think about the people who would figure out how many parts per million we need in benzene, right? To say that the Administrative State has taken a beating as of late would be, I think, an understatement. And even kind of before then, we have a long-standing tension between political control and neutral expertise within the Administrative State. So I guess where do you see? So we read this book, right?
Yeah.
Where do you see either us going or where we ought to go? Us going is more descriptive, although the book's very descriptive, with regards to bringing back that expertise, or is that ship sailed and we got to figure out a new way of doing things?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly it. I mean, I think we're. I hate to say it. I mean, I don't know who I'm exactly quoting, although I have a suspicion that is we're going to have to go through a lot more pain before the ship gets sailing in the right direction. Which raises the issue. I mean, I don't know if you were going to go there, but I'm looking at the time. I go, this book was published in last May.
Yeah.
Okay. And who knew, right? Who knew? And so I think a legitimate question is, what does this book have to do with the current administration? And I think for me, the answer is, oh my goodness, our theory. Let's have a healthy mix of government and markets. Do we have that today? I think the answer is we don't have either. I think we have instability in markets, let's call tariffs, potential taxes with trillions of dollars of running up the deficit. We'll see what happens with tax proposals. But those two things, there's instability in markets, all right? So the market side of it's not working very well. And does anybody feel particularly comfortable with stability in government today? My law school's or my university rather, is on the list of being investigated for whatever we're doing wrong. And in Indiana as well. We were at Notre Dame last week. Notre Dame is being, I guess it's everything with every state university or university in a state with a vowel gets investigated, but no, I mean,
thank God the state of
okay. While I'm on my high horse, I mean, this idea that you can criticize law schools, universities, the law firm thing is, my goodness, mind-boggling beyond belief. To have media companies fold, the NCAA folds. I mean, dominoes are falling. Now, I don't mean to say that in a too much of a Chicken Little way, but they're not. The signs aren't good.
Yeah. Well. So I see the book from reading it, over the past couple of weeks, to first of all disabuse one prominent line of polemics and arguments, right? One that I don't think anyone acts as if they believe, which is that laissez-faire all the way down, right? Which is almost, I think, kind of taken as a weird article of faith. And the book's like, that's never been true. It's never going to be true.
Right.
Sit down and shut up, right? And that is a useful tonic, I think, especially in terms of kind of political rhetoric, not in terms of reality. But then, as you just say, like another way of thinking about, like, why would a university or a law firm capitulate to government threats? Government threats from one branch, essentially, right? And the answer is that they're holding purse strings.
Right.
Right?
Oh, no, that's it.
Right? Which is, it's different if you're a state university, then you're kind of part of the government. But they're holding purse strings. And one response, even taking the Tomain Shapiro line, is to say, well, that's telling me there's too much government involvement here, especially if I think the government, the polity, might be sick, right? It's infecting markets, right? And we've got the admixture wrong,
Right.
right? Maybe contrary to inventing GPS and funding universities to that, whatever's going on, maybe that's a healthy government with a healthy market, but we got a sick government which is infecting the market. And, someone insert some amputation metaphor here, right?
Yeah,
Maybe that works.
Yeah. No, I may not be directly responding, but it seems to me you're saying.
Well, I got to ask the question rather than have to answer it. So, it's way easier on this side.
But your comment raises the question, is there too much of an intermix between government and markets, right? Law firms are capitulating because of they got a lot of dough on the line. Universities are doing the same thing. Clark Kerr was the president of the University of California system in the early 60s, wrote a book on this and warned about government funding universities too much, and it's come to pass. Hey, here's a thought experiment. Let's play radical leftist and say, hey, maybe big law firms ought to just collapse.
And we can't say that here because our students are going to go work for them. So,
but the reason I raise it as a sort of a specter is that, wait a minute, have we gotten too tight? Great question.
Yeah. I don't know. Do we want to open it to other questions? Or do we have? No, that's just a mic. I don't know. I mean, we can ramble the whole time, but do other people want to jump in?
Yes.
Yeah. Just speak up.
No, thank you for that. Has government ever gotten too big, right? Do you have an example in mind? I mean, I think the threat now is that it could get bigger. Again, one branch, the unitary theory of government. Let's spend some time on. No, we won't. But no, could it happen? Yes. Do I think we're there? No, I don't. Can I think of a time in history and it's been that way? I'm going to say no. Okay? Otherwise, we would have a complete authoritarian government, which I don't think we have, nor do I think we ever have had, in my opinion. Is that responsive?
I would say yes, but then I think more thinking about more specific industries and here too.
Okay. I think I have an example. And that is, I like the New Deal. I think the New Deal did some wonderful things. But you know what it also did? Created a corporate state, right? So if that's where you're sort of pointing to, I go, yeah, I get it. There's a great book that I called The Greening of America, written 55 years ago by a Yale law professor who was very progressive, very thoughtful, Charles Reich, and he 2 or 3 of the chapters of that book go exactly to that point is, I think government has gotten too big. Okay? And so I see the point.
And I might think that bigness and authoritarianism are two kind of separate things, right? You can have a relatively small, by which I mean intruding into the economy or doing many things, authoritarian state, or you can have a big one. They tend to get maybe a little big, but not, depends on the state, right? It's just their intrusiveness. But there were other, well, fine. Yeah.
Hi, thank you. This has been very thought-provoking, and it makes me think about the reference to how recently you wrote the book and how much has changed, including, I was at the Justice Department giving legal advice the last 4 years when the major question doctrine was created, going under the Sleep Council, what do you do with this new thing? When we gave advice, we would talk to economists at the Treasury Department from the Antitrust Division. When you have sick government, you have a president who is not asking for actual legal advice, you're playing with the rule of law. And I'm wondering what that does to deference to agencies, what courts should do in that kind of situation.
Sure, sure,
They're not asking enough. They don't
Sure.
care what the right legal answer is.
sure.
So that just, in my mind, supports your point from a different direction, that this is an unprecedented time, including for the rule of law and rule of courts versus.
So let me just take your comment and move it in a slight different direction, which is things that I wonder about. Let's assume that the Trump administration just ends tomorrow. How much damage has already been done? Right? I don't have any evidence for what I'm going to say. It's just an instinct, and that is, I can't imagine that the accumulation of power in the White House, that the next person who takes over is going to give a lot of that power back. Do you understand my point? And so what are the costs of, that we go through the next administration, we finish it, we will have lost employees, lost economists, lost scientists. Are we going to get them all back? Let's assume that we do get rid of all of these costs. Well, wait a minute. What about our opportunity costs that are lost? If you lose scientists, you're saving money, but you may also be avoiding, right? You're avoiding gains to be made. You're avoiding finding benefits. So you have you have a cost of losing people. You have the cost of losing benefits that are coming along. You're going to have to recoup the costs of trying to rebuild the institutions that have been damaged. I mean, those costs alone strike me as unacceptable.
Do you want to get someone over here on the right-hand side?
Sure. Hello. My question is there a line of ideology that's consistent that has a majority of the court wanting to vote for deregulation and for this major questions doctrine, at the same time wanting to expand the executive branch through this unitary executive theory? Are they conducive? Do they go together, or is that entirely inconsistent?
So here's my view on the unitary executive, and that's this. I think you have to look at it in two dimensions, from my point of view. Dimension number one is, you win an election, you win both houses of Congress, and you have a sympathetic court. That's a unitary executive, right? By definition. And let's call that a political unitary executive. I think the argument for a legal unitary executive is baloney, right? Why do I say that? Well, the last time I had this debate with somebody from the Federalist Society at the law school, I go, wait a minute, let's look at the Constitution. You take the Constitution, you say, look, Article 2, the president is responsible for executing the laws. I go, why don't you read the first article? What is the president executing? You know why the Article 1 is Article 1? Because John Locke said the most important part of the three branches of government is the legislative branch. So Article 1 legislates. What does the president do? Executes what the legislature said. Now, I'm losing that argument, by the way, in the scholarly literature. I think there are people that think, no, what I just said is wrong. The president does have all these authorities. Justice Kagan, I think, actually wrote an article that would be sympathetic to what I just said, right? That the president has much more power. So, like I said, I'm losing the argument, but you know what? I think my argument's pretty sound.
I'll say two things real quick. One, shockingly, presidents like to, if we think they're being deliberate in post-Reagan, as the book lays out, right, presidents are being deliberate with who they appoint, they might appoint people very sympathetic to presidential power. Okay. Two, I'll give you homework. Short and Sugarman have a great article on exactly just this. Yeah, why don't we go in the hat, and then we'll, right there, and then I think we'll probably be in.
So, if we were to be in favor of more regulatory measures for the government, that might be shifting the decision-making into the agencies.
Yep.
Is there positive externalities to having agencies be the place for competition of ideas as opposed to the consumer
Can you help me out a little bit? I like the sound of your comment, but
So I think the market will look to influence wherever the power is,
Got
wherever
it.
the decision making is.
Got it.
That's going to be in the agencies. Are there positive externalities for that being in the agencies?
yeah, I'm going to try. I'm going to be indirect in responding to your question. So you're an agent. You're an agency, right? So here's how agencies work. They have to follow the Constitution. They have to follow the enabling legislation. They have to follow the APA. They develop a culture of expertise, right? They have judicial review. There are a lot of checks on what agencies can do. And so this fear that there's this headless fourth branch comes out of the 1930s, that phrase, by the way, of government that is running amok strikes me as polemical, not based. And if you look at the law, if you look at the positive law, I think there are plenty of checks on agency action. Is somebody going to get a wild hair and come up with something crazy? Could happen. But if you work in an agency, don't you want to honor what you be a good economist, be a good scientist, be a good actuary? And I think the answer is, yeah, there are professional checks in the culture of agency action. Should we get rid of a bunch of laws that are too costly? Yeah, well, give me a list and let's get rid of them. I'm not against deregulation, but I want a reason for the deregulation. Yes.
You know, like take, for example, the IRS.
Yeah.
They know how much I owe, but they want me to tell them how much I owe, and if I get it wrong, then I can either be sued and they take out
Sure.
my check that they know how much I owe, or I can go to jail. So certain systems like that, like, wouldn't wouldn't it have been better in the past by either party to try to make it better?
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right, and I think particularly as consumers and people that don't have a lot of wealth, we get screwed. Is that a fair characterization of your point? But I want to take a little different. There's 3 or 4 books that I can think of that talked about the point you're making, that, you know what, as a citizen, I am really disaffected by government. This didn't come out of nowhere, as you say, right? But you know what the response, I mean, if you read the books, I'm thinking of one about that deals with Chemical Alley in Louisiana and what's wrong with Kansas, those types of books. The problem was that government didn't help us, right? The government didn't do enough. That's why we're angry. All right, it's not that they did bad things to us, although there's some of that. So I think there's a duality here, that government may have hurt me as a little guy, yes, because I don't have the wherewithal to hire the lawyers that I need to combat that type of public power. But the other side of it is, and I think it's more prevalent, is the government hasn't done enough to protect us.
I think that's our time. So let's
Okay.
thank Professor Tomain for coming.
Thank you.